The elevator doors had been acting up all week, opening too slowly, closing too quickly. Robert Mitchell knew this better than anyone. At 42, he'd been the head janitor at Roosevelt Elementary for 8 years now, long enough to know every creaky board, every temperamental fixture, every corner where dust liked to gather. His weathered hands, calloused from years of honest work, gripped the mop handle a little tighter as he watched the scene unfold before him. Inside that stubborn elevator stood his 10-year-old son, Tommy, blonde hair catching the fluorescent light, his small frame dwarfed by the metal walls around him. The boy's eyes were wide, not with fear, but with that particular mix of embarrassment and frustration that Robert recognized all too well. Tommy had been trying to get to the second floor for his after-school tutoring session when the elevator had stopped between floors. Again, "Dad always fixes everything," Tommy was saying to the woman in the sharp business suit, his voice carrying that innocent confidence that only children possess. "He knows this whole building better than anybody." The woman, Ms. Patricia Lawson, the school district's efficiency coordinator, stood with her arms crossed, her perfectly styled brown hair not a strand out of place. She'd been at Roosevelt for 3 days now, clipboard in hand, making notes about operational improvements and resource allocation. Robert had seen her type before. City folks who came in with their charts and graphs, thinking they could understand in 3 days what took years to truly know. Not unkind, necessarily, just different, focused on numbers instead of people. But then came Coach Bradley Stevens. Coach Stevens was everything Robert wasn't, loud where Robert was quiet, commanding where Robert was gentle. 28 years old, with perfectly styled auburn hair and a coaching whistle that seemed permanently attached to his neck. He'd been hired 6 months ago, fresh out of college with a degree in sports management and ideas about modernizing the athletic program. The coach strode down the hallway with that particular swagger that younger men sometimes carry, the kind that Robert had once possessed himself back when he thought he knew everything about the world. "Elevator problems again?" Coach Stevens called out, his voice echoing off the hallway walls. "Figures. This whole place is falling apart." Robert continued mopping, but his ears were tuned to the conversation. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the most important moments happened when you appeared not to be listening. "The maintenance staff here," Coach Stevens continued, his voice growing louder as he warmed to his subject. "They're just going through the motions. No real expertise, no professional training, just basic custodial work." Ms. Lawson looked up from her clipboard, her eyebrows raised slightly. Tommy's small voice piped up from inside the elevator. "My dad isn't just basic anything. He fixes stuff nobody else can fix." Coach Stevens laughed, not meanly, but with the casual dismissiveness of someone who'd never had to fix anything with his own hands. "Kid, no offense to your dad, but there's a difference between mopping floors and actually understanding how complex systems work. What we need here is a real maintenance contractor. Professionals who know what they're doing." Robert's mop stilled for just a moment. In his 8 years at Roosevelt, he'd never once called outside for help with the building's quirks. The old boiler in the basement that needed just the right touch to keep running smoothly. The gym floor that required a specific type of wax, applied in a particular pattern. The elevator that, well, that had its own personality. "Perhaps," Ms. Lawson said carefully, "we should explore more cost-effective maintenance solutions." And that's when Coach Stevens made his mistake. "Tell you what," he said, puffing out his chest slightly. "I'll bet our janitor here couldn't get that elevator running in the next 10 minutes if his job depended on it. Guy probably doesn't even know where the control panel is." The hallway fell quiet. Tommy's face appeared in the gap between the elevator doors, his eyes searching for his father. Robert could see the question there. The same question he'd been asking himself for months as budget cuts loomed and whispers of restructuring grew louder. Was he enough? Was his quiet, steady work, his deep knowledge of this old building and its needs? Was any of that valuable in a world that seemed to prize credentials over character? Robert set down his mop and walked slowly toward the elevator. His work boots made soft, squeaking sounds on the freshly cleaned floor. When he reached the doors, he knelt down so he was eye level with his son. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly. "How you doing in there?" "I'm okay, Dad," Tommy replied, his voice small but trusting. "The doors just won't open all the way." Robert nodded, then stood and examined the elevator doors. He ran his fingers along the edge, feeling for the slight catch that he'd noticed developing over the past few weeks. There, right where the left door met its track. "Excuse me?" Coach Stevens said impatiently. "Are you actually going to do something, or should we call the fire department?" Robert didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to his supply closet and returned with a small can of lubricant and a worn screwdriver, tools he'd been meaning to use on this elevator for days, but hadn't found the right moment. "The thing about old buildings," Robert said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "is that they're like people. They have their quirks, their particular needs. This elevator, she's been here since 1987. The tracks get a little sticky when the humidity changes." He applied a small amount of lubricant to the track, then used the screwdriver to gently adjust the alignment of the door mechanism. His movements were precise, economical, the result of years spent understanding not just how things worked, but why they sometimes didn't. "Most repair manuals will tell you to replace the whole door assembly," Robert continued, working steadily. "Costs the district about $3,000, but sometimes you just need to listen to what the building is telling you." Coach Stevens shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Lawson had put down her clipboard and was watching intently. Robert pressed the elevator call button. Nothing happened for a moment, and then, with a gentle mechanical sigh, the doors slid open smoothly. Tommy stepped out, grinning widely. "Thanks, Dad," the boy said, wrapping his arms around his father's waist. But Robert wasn't done. "Coach Stevens," he said, turning to face the younger man. "You mentioned professional training. You're right that I don't have a degree in building maintenance. What I do have is 8 years of listening to this building breathe, of learning its rhythms and understanding its needs." He gestured toward the elevator. "That fix I just did? It'll hold for about 6 months before needing adjustment again. But if you brought in outside contractors, they'd spend 2 days diagnosing the problem, charge the district 4 times my monthly salary, and probably recommend replacing equipment. That just needs a little understanding." Ms. Lawson picked up her clipboard, but Robert noticed she wasn't writing. She was listening. "I've saved this district over $30,000 in the past 2 years, Robert continued, his voice remaining calm and steady. "Not because I'm trying to prove anything, but because someone has to care about making things work with what we have. Someone has to understand that efficiency isn't just about cutting costs. It's about recognizing value where it already exists." Coach Stevens opened his mouth, then closed it again. The hallway was very quiet. "Every morning," Robert said, "I walk through this building and I see what needs attention. Not just the big, obvious problems, but the small things that prevent bigger problems from happening. The loose handrail on the second floor that could cause a fall. The window in Mrs. Patterson's classroom that doesn't close properly and lets in cold air. The drinking fountain that runs constantly unless you know exactly how to adjust the handle." He looked directly at Coach Stevens. "Those might seem like small things to someone focused on big-picture improvements. But to a 70-year-old teacher climbing those stairs every day, or to kids trying to learn in a cold classroom, or to a district trying to keep water bills manageable, those small things matter enormously." Tommy had been listening to his father with the rapt attention that children reserve for moments when they suddenly understand something important about the adults in their lives. "My dad," Tommy said proudly, "he doesn't just fix things, he takes care of people." Ms. Lawson closed her clipboard with a soft snap. "Mr. Mitchell," she said. "I'd like to schedule a meeting with you tomorrow. I think we need to discuss your role here in more detail." Coach Stevens cleared his throat. "Robert, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions, and they were wrong." Robert nodded gracefully. "We all make assumptions, Coach. The important thing is what we do when we realize they might not be accurate." As the group began to disperse, Tommy tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, "were you scared when Coach Stevens said those things?" Robert knelt down again, meeting his son's eyes. "You know what, buddy? Sometimes when people question whether we're good enough, it can make us question ourselves. But the truth is, our worth doesn't come from other people's opinions. It comes from how we treat others, how we take care of our responsibilities, and how we show up every day to do our best." Tommy nodded solemnly. "Like how you show up here every morning and make sure everything works for everyone?" "Exactly like that," Robert said, ruffling his son's hair. "Now, didn't you have tutoring to get to?" As they walked toward the stairs together, Robert reflected on the afternoon's events. He thought about Coach Stevens, young, ambitious, probably facing his own pressures to prove himself. He thought about Ms. Lawson, trying to balance budgets while still serving the school's needs. And he thought about Tommy, watching it all unfold, learning lessons about dignity, respect, and the quiet strength that comes from doing good work without needing recognition. The next morning, Robert arrived at Roosevelt Elementary at 6 a.m., just like always. He made his rounds, checking on his building, ensuring everything was ready for another day of learning and growing. When he reached the elevator, he smiled to see that it was running perfectly, smooth and quiet, just the way it should be. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important victories are the quiet ones, the moments when we choose understanding over judgment, when we recognize that everyone has something valuable to contribute, and when we remember that taking care of each other is really what makes any community work. And in the end, that's what Roosevelt Elementary was: not just a building with classrooms and hallways, but a community, one that worked best when everyone's contributions were valued, understood, and appreciated. Robert picked up his mop and began his day, whistling softly as he worked. After all, there was always something that needed attention, someone who needed help, and another opportunity to show up with quiet strength and gentle kindness. That, he knew, was more than enough. A story about the dignity of work, the power of understanding, and the quiet heroes who keep our world running smoothly.